This happened a few years ago, but it's one of those things that just sticks with you. It was back in 2018, and I was in the middle of a cross-country drive. I just finished a huge project at my old job, and to be honest, I was completely burnt out. I quit, packed my old Toyota Camry with everything I owned, and decided to drive from Boston all the way to LA with no real plan, just a vague idea of a fresh start. The trip was supposed to be a reset, a way to clear my head, but by the time I hit the Midwest, the endless miles of cornfields and gray skies were starting to wear on me. I was tired, lonely, and my car was running on fumes. The day this all went down, it was late, probably past midnight, and the rain was coming down in sheets. The kind of rain that makes the road disappear and your wipers can't keep up. I was exhausted, fighting to keep my eyes open, and all I wanted was to find a place to rest for a bit. But that's when I saw it. A small, beat-up gas station on the side of the road. A single, flickering fluorescent light sign promising 24HR. It was a godsend. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires, and the place looked like something out of a horror movie. The building was a dingy, peeling beige, and the pumps were old and rusty. There was no one else there, just me, my tired car, and the relentless rain. I filled up my tank, paid the surly attendant through a thick pane of glass, and my bladder, which had been complaining for the last hour, finally won the argument. The restroom was around the side of the building, a separate little shack with a single, grimy door. The air was cold and damp, and a strong, metallic smell hung in the air, a mix of old rust and stale water. I pushed the door open, stepped inside, and that's when everything went sideways. A few things hit me all at once. The smell, for one, was even stronger inside, like a copper penny left to rot, and the sound, or lack thereof. The drumming rain that had been a constant companion for hours suddenly just stopped. The silence was absolute, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on my ears. The bathroom itself was weirdly clean, or at least sterile-looking. The tiles were a stark, cold white, and the stalls were a pale, institutional gray. There was an unnerving uniformity to it all, a sense that everything had been scrubbed and arranged by someone with an almost obsessive need for order. The lighting was the worst part. A single, buzzing fluorescent tube overhead cast a sickly yellow glow that didn't illuminate so much as it just highlighted the shadows. It felt like I'd walked into a movie set, one where the atmosphere was designed to make you feel as unwelcome as possible. I hurried to the first stall, just wanting to get out of there as fast as I could. After I was done, I pushed the heavy metal door of the stall open and went to wash my hands. I remember looking at my reflection in the mirror, my face pale, eyes tired, and then looking at the exit door. The door I had just walked through. The door that was no longer there. My heart did a quick, frantic little flutter in my chest. I blinked, shook my head, and looked again. Nothing. Just a solid, seamless wall of cold white tile. No handle, no hinges, no sign that a door had ever existed there at all. I took a few steps forward, my stomach tightening into a knot. I ran my hand over the wall, the tiles cool and smooth under my fingertips. I tapped on it, expecting a hollow sound, but it was solid, unyielding. My mind was screaming, "This isn't real, this isn't happening," but my hands and my eyes were telling me a different story. The silence outside felt a million miles away, and the only sound in the room was the frantic thumping of my own heartbeat. I was trapped, and for the first time on that entire trip, I felt a fear that had nothing to do with being tired or alone. Panic, pure and unfiltered, started to claw its way up my throat. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. I had to be hallucinating. The exhaustion, the rain, the stress, it was all getting to me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself to calm down. When I opened them again, the wall was still there, solid, unmoving. I started shouting, my voice raw and echoing in the suffocating silence. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" I pounded on the wall with my fists, the dull thudding sound barely making a dent in the stillness. It felt like I was in a soundproof box, completely cut off from the world. A cold dread settled in my bones as I realized the rain, the very thing that had driven me inside, was completely gone. I couldn't hear it, not even a faint whisper of a drop. The world outside had vanished, and I was alone in this sterile, terrifying cage that I started running, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I raced to the back of the room, where I thought I remembered another door leading to a janitor's closet or something. But when I got there, it was just another wall of flawless white tiles. The same unsettling perfection. I tried the stalls again, yanking on each door handle, hoping one would lead to an escape, but they were all just stalls. The layout was beginning to twist and blur in my mind. The endless rows of identical sinks with their grimy, reflective mirrors seemed to stretch on forever, each one showing me a more terrified version of myself. I kept running, turning corners that felt like they shouldn't be there, passing the same hand dryer 3 or 4 times. The place was a maze, a funhouse mirror of a bathroom that was deliberately confusing me. I was getting dizzy, my sense of direction completely shot, and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of a whisper started to weave its way into the edges of my hearing. The whispering was faint at first, a barely there sound that felt less like a voice and more like a thought in my own head. It wasn't in English or any language I knew. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like dry leaves rustling or a snake slithering through grass. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied presence that was watching me. The feeling of being observed was overwhelming. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, the whispering would get a little louder, a little closer. It wasn't malicious, not at first. It was almost playful, like it was enjoying my terror, enjoying my frantic attempts to find an escape that wasn't there. I could see my reflection in a grimy mirror, and my face was a mask of sheer panic, eyes wide, breath hitched. And in the mirror's distorted surface, in the shadows just behind my shoulder, I thought I saw a flicker of movement. A tall, impossibly thin shape that vanished the second I turned my head. My blood ran cold that I started running again, a desperate, breathless sprint through the twisted halls. The flickering lights started to go out, one by one, plunging sections of the restroom into total darkness. The cold tile walls seemed to press in on me, the sterile white now replaced by a deep, suffocating black. The whispering was a constant buzz in my ears now, urging me forward, guiding me deeper into the maze. I couldn't tell if I was going in circles or just getting lost. The whispers weren't playful anymore. They were hungry. They were getting louder, more demanding, and I could almost make out a sinister, wet, clicking sound beneath them, like two bones tapping together. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the thing following me wasn't a hallucination. It was real, and it was waiting for me at the end of this twisted path. I remember collapsing against a wall, my knees giving out, my breath a ragged, useless thing in my chest. The whispering was so loud now, a chorus of voices that seemed to be speaking from inside my own skull. Closer, come closer. They hissed, and I could feel a cold, unseen presence breathing on the back of my neck. I looked up and saw a new corridor had formed where there had been none before, bathed in a dim, pulsing red light. It wasn't the kind of red light you see on a fire truck. It was a deep, crimson glow that felt warm and sickening, like a fresh wound. The metallic smell was now overwhelming, and I realized it wasn't just rust, it was blood. I could almost taste it in the air, thick and coppery. The floor, once white tile, was now a grimy, streaked brown, as if someone had dragged something heavy and wet through it. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that whatever was waiting for me was down that hallway, and it was the thing that had been tormenting me. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I stood up. The fear was still there, but a new, cold resolve had taken over. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. I was done running. I was done being a puppet in its twisted game. I started walking towards the red light, my footsteps echoing with a morbid finality. The whispers grew into a frantic cacophony, a mix of taunts and promises. "You're ours, you're trapped." They hissed, but I just kept walking. The air grew heavier, thicker, until it felt like I was moving through sludge. The red light pulsated with an unnerving rhythm, like a monstrous heart beating in the walls. I finally reached the end of the hallway and found myself in a small, empty room. No stalls, no sinks, just a single, tarnished-looking hand mirror on a pedestal in the center of the room. It was the only object in the entire place that wasn't clean. It was dark with a kind of thick, oily residue, and the glass was so clouded I could barely see my own reflection. The whispering suddenly stopped. The silence came back, heavier and more profound than before. I stood there, staring at the mirror, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst. The surface of the glass was shifting, swirling like a dark pool of water. I saw a face forming in it, not my own, but a pale, gaunt face with hollowed-out eyes that seemed to drink in the light. It wasn't a monster in the traditional sense, but something much worse. It was a reflection of pure, consuming loneliness. The face was smiling, a slow, deliberate curving of lips that never quite reached the eyes. It was the smile of something that had been alone for a very, very long time and had finally found a companion. It wanted me. It was feeding on the despair and the isolation I had been feeling for months, the kind of loneliness that makes you feel like you're disappearing. I finally understood. This whole place wasn't just a trap. It was a projection of my own worst fears, and that thing in the mirror was the embodiment of it. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. Not a scream of terror, but a scream of pure, raw defiance. I screamed all the frustration, the burnout, the sadness, everything I had been holding in for months. I screamed at the face in the mirror, at the room, at the very idea of being trapped by my own despair. I yelled that I wasn't alone, that I had people who cared about me, that I had a future waiting for me in LA that I was going to find. I screamed until my voice was hoarse and my lungs ached. The face in the mirror flinched, the smile faltering, the eyes narrowing in what looked like confusion. It didn't understand. It didn't know what to do with a person who fought back against their own emptiness. The air around me began to vibrate, and the red light flickered violently before going out. The mirror shattered with a deafening crash, and the grimy walls around me seemed to melt away, replaced by the familiar, peeling beige of the gas station. I was back where I started. The rain was still falling, and the silence had been replaced by the sound of its drumming on the roof that I was on my knees on the cold, concrete floor of the gas station bathroom. My hands were scraped and bruised, and a small shard of glass was embedded in my palm. The door was right there, heavy and metallic, exactly where it was supposed to be. I got to my feet, my legs wobbly, and stumbled out into the damp night air. I didn't look back. I got in my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the ignition. The old Camry roared to life, and I put it in drive, leaving that cursed gas station behind in a cloud of dust and rain. I never stopped driving until the sun was a warm, yellow smear on the horizon. The memory of that night is a raw, jagged thing in my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk inside us, waiting for an opportunity to pull us in. I got to LA, and I've been doing well, but I never forgot that the scariest monster I ever faced wasn't a creature with fangs and claws, but a reflection of my own loneliness. I guess I'm still trying to figure out if what I saw was a real thing or just a manifestation of my exhaustion and emotional state. All I know is that it felt real. It was too real to be a dream. It was the fall of 2008, and I was in my final year of college, majoring in art history. My life at that time was a blur of caffeine-fueled late nights, dusty library books, and the constant hum of a campus that never seemed to sleep. I was a loner, not by choice, but by circumstance. My best friend had transferred to another school, and I'd found myself drifting, spending most of my time lost in the past, both literally, through my studies, and figuratively, through my own memories. My routine was rigid: classes, the library, and then my part-time job as an assistant manager at a small, independent movie theater on the edge of town. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills and, more importantly, it was quiet. I was a creature of habit, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of my days. Little did I know, that rhythm was about to be shattered in a way I couldn't have possibly imagined. This wasn't some spooky ghost story you hear around a campfire. This was real, and it started in the most mundane, ordinary place imaginable: a public restroom. The theater was old, one of those beautiful, decaying movie palaces from the 1920s with plush red seats and a ceiling that looked like it was painted with 1,000 tiny stars. But the back of the house, where the staff worked and the restrooms were, was a different story. It was all peeling paint, exposed pipes, and a smell that was a strange mix of stale popcorn and disinfectant. That night, a late screening of a classic horror film had just let out, and I was doing my closing rounds. The theater was empty now, the last stragglers having disappeared into the night. My footsteps echoed on the cold tile floor as I checked the women's restroom. The air was heavy and still, save for the low, buzzing hum of the ancient fluorescent lights overhead. One of them was flickering erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made the cramped space feel even more claustrophobic. It was an atmosphere I'd grown used to, the eerie quiet of a place that had once been filled with laughter and screams, now left to its own devices. I remember thinking how perfect the silence was, a stark contrast to the chaos of my life outside of these walls. I went to the sink to wash my hands, and that's when it started. I remember looking up into the mirror, a huge, slightly foggy pane that spanned the length of the sinks. It was one of those old mirrors with little black splotches and a faint, silvered patina around the edges. I splashed cold water on my face, the droplets feeling like a shock to my tired system, and then started drying my hands with a paper towel. As I turned my head to grab another sheet, I caught a glimpse of something unsettling in the reflection. My reflection, the one I'd just seen, seemed to lag behind my movement. It was only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. My reflected self was still looking at me, its head cocked at an odd angle, long after I had already moved my own head. It was a subtle thing, almost imperceptible, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My mind, exhausted from a day of cramming and a long shift, tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a remnant of the flickering bulb. But the feeling, that cold, creeping dread, was already there, taking root deep in my gut. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a side effect of being alone in a dark, old building late at night, that my hands felt clammy, and the air around me suddenly felt heavy, thick with a stillness that was unnatural. I forced myself to look back at the mirror, trying to be casual, to prove to myself that my imagination was just running wild. That's when I saw it. In the background of my reflection, just to the right of my shoulder, there was a figure. It was a tall, impossibly thin shadow, almost a smudge against the dimly lit wall. It was too tall to be a person, and it had a stillness to it that wasn't human. No defined features, no face, just a dark void where a person should have been. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, deafening silence. Every rational part of my brain screamed that it was just a shadow cast by the flickering light, or maybe a coat hanging on the back of a stall door. But the figure wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching. I held my breath, my eyes darting from the reflection to the stall door behind me, which was slightly ajar. It was empty. The restroom was empty. I forced myself to turn around, my entire body screaming at me not to. My sneakers squeaked on the cold tiles as I spun, my eyes wide and frantic, scanning every inch of the small room. My gaze darted to the two stalls behind me. The first one was empty, the door slightly ajar. The second one, at the far end, had its door closed. My breath hitched. Was someone in there? A prank? I called out, my voice a thin, reedy whisper that felt totally inadequate in the heavy silence. Hello? Is anyone in here? No answer. The silence was so profound it felt like a living thing, pressing in on me. I took a tentative step forward, my hand outstretched to push on the door. But something stopped me. A primal, gut-wrenching feeling that told me to stay as far away from that door as possible. It wasn't a person in there. I just knew it. My hand fell back to my side, trembling, and I made the mistake of looking back at the mirrored my reflection was still there, but it wasn't me anymore. My eyes in the mirror were wider, darker, and filled with a silent, primal terror that wasn't my own. And behind me, in the reflection, the shadowy figure was now closer, standing right behind my reflected self, its dark, featureless form looming over my shoulder. It was a solid, undeniable presence, a void of pure blackness that seemed to suck the light out of the air around it. I could feel its gaze on the back of my neck, a heavy, cold weight. The space between my reflection and the figure was gone. They were almost touching. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. My eyes were fixed on the mirror, paralyzed by the sight of this thing that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't a shadow. It was a creature, and the mirror wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was showing me a reality that existed just beyond the veil of our own. A reality where this thing was standing directly behind me. I could feel its cold breath on my neck, even though I knew the room was empty. That feeling of cold breath, the absolute certainty that something was there, was the thing that finally broke my paralysis. I stumbled backward, my heart still a frantic hammer against my chest, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. My eyes never left the mirror, fixed on the terrifying tableau, my reflection, distorted and horrified, with that tall, impossibly black figure looming over it. The flickering light caught the edges of the mirror, making the reflection waver and distort, as if the glass itself was struggling to contain the horror it was showing me. I felt a single, cold drop of sweat trickle down my temple, but my body was on autopilot. I couldn't tear my gaze away. The figure in the mirror, this thing that had no face and no discernible features, began to move its head slowly. It wasn't a human motion. It was more like a puppet on a string, a jerky, unnatural tilt that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. My reflected self was just frozen, a silent scream etched on its face, unable to move, unable to look away. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that if I took my eyes off that reflection, even for a second, the thing behind me would become real. The silence in the room was now a physical presence, a weight that crushed the air out of my lungs. The distant drip of water had stopped, and the low hum of the lights seemed to fade into nothingness. All that existed was me, the mirror, and the terrifying entity trapped within it. I watched as the figure in the glass raised its arm, a long, spindly appendage that seemed to absorb the light around it. It moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, a horrifying ballet of silent menace. Its hand, a collection of what looked like long, tapering claws, reached out toward my reflected self, toward the back of my head. I could feel the space behind me getting colder, the hairs on my arms standing on end in a wave of goosebumps. It was like a game of red light, green light, except the stakes were incomprehensible. I couldn't blink, I couldn't look away, because the moment I did, that slow, terrifying movement would be unleashed. My eyes burned, the edges of my vision starting to go white, but I forced myself to stay locked on that reflection. I needed to see what it was doing. I needed to know. The claws in the mirror were now inches from the back of my reflected neck, and I could feel an icy pinprick sensation on my own skin that a sudden, high-pitched ringing sound pierced the oppressive silence. It was my phone, buzzing insistently in my pocket. The sudden noise, a sharp intrusion from the real world, made me jump, and in that split second of shock, my eyes flickered away from the mirror. I squeezed them shut, a sob catching in my throat, bracing for the worst. My heart seized, waiting for a cold touch, a chilling presence, anything to confirm my deepest fears. But nothing came. The ringing stopped, leaving only the deafening silence in its wake. Tentatively, I opened one eye, then the other, and looked back at the mirror. My reflection was there, standing a few feet back from the sinks, a look of profound horror still on my face. But behind me, the figure was gone. The stall door at the end of the room was closed, as it had been before, and the flickering light once again cast familiar, harmless shadows. The air was still thick and heavy, but the bone-deep cold was gone. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding, my knees threatening to give out. My entire body was trembling, a violent vibration that started in my chest and ran down to my fingertips that I didn't try to rationalize it. I didn't try to find a logical explanation. I just knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had just had a brush with something fundamentally wrong. My legs, still shaky, carried me forward to the sink, and I splashed water on my face again. This time, I didn't look at my reflection. I just stared at the gleaming chrome of the faucet, the tiny water droplets clinging to the metal, anything but my own face in that mirror. The fear, though the immediate threat was gone, had settled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It was a feeling of being watched, a sense of having been marked. I knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't over. I had seen something I shouldn't have seen, and whatever was on the other side of that glass was now aware of me. As I hurried out of the restroom, leaving the old, haunted theater behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving a part of myself behind, too, a part that had been caught and forever stained by a reflection that wasn't mine. When I got home that night, I didn't feel relief, just a deeper, colder kind of fear. I knew it was aware of me now. It wasn't just a fleeting glimpse of something strange. It was a conscious, malevolent presence that had singled me out. I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-awareness, jumping at every shadow, every unexpected reflection. I started avoiding mirrors altogether. I'd wash my face in the dark and dry my hair by feel, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm whenever I had to pass a reflective surface. It was an exhausting, isolating existence. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, haunted by nightmares of that dark figure reaching for me, its long, clawed fingers just inches from my neck. My apartment, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every time I had to use the bathroom, I'd turn the lights off, just in case. The rational part of my brain, the one that had studied art history and analyzed brushstrokes, was screaming for an explanation. But the primal part, the part that had felt that cold breath on my neck, knew there was no explanation, only a truth that was too terrifying to face. The climax of this waking nightmare came 3 days later. I was finally at home, trying to force myself to eat something, when I heard a faint scratching sound coming from my bathroom. It was a soft, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails on glass. My stomach dropped. I knew what it was. I walked slowly down the short hallway, my entire body rigid with fear, and pushed the bathroom door open just enough to peer inside. The room was dark, but a sliver of moonlight from the window illuminated the mirror. In the middle of the glass, a tiny, circular patch of fog was forming, and as I watched, trembling, a single letter was drawn into the fog. Then another, and another. STRE. My heart was a frantic bird, trying to beat its way out of my chest. The scratching stopped, and the letter E lingered in the foggy circle. Then, the circle of fog began to expand, slowly, deliberately, until it covered the entire mirror. My reflection appeared, but it wasn't me. It was me from that night in the theater, my face a mask of pure terror, my reflected eyes locked on something behind me that I couldn't see. And then, slowly, a crack appeared in the glass, right through the center of my reflected face, spreading like a spiderweb across the mirror. The sound was a loud, horrifying splintering that echoed in the tiny apartment. I slammed the door shut and ran. I ran to the hallway closet, grabbed the biggest, heaviest blanket I owned, and ran back to the bathroom. My hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I draped the blanket over the mirror, covering it completely. The splintering sound stopped, and the cold, terrifying weight in the air disappeared. I stood there, breathing heavily, my body soaked in a cold sweat, until I finally collapsed to the floor, my back against the wall, and just sat there in the dark, clutching that blanket over my face that I spent the next week with the mirror covered, a heavy blanket taped firmly over the glass. The feeling of being watched was gone, but the fear was a constant companion. I didn't dare uncover it. The silence in the apartment was a fragile thing, and I felt like any small movement, any wrong decision, would shatter it and bring that horror back. My art history major finally came in handy, in the most bizarre way imaginable. I remembered a lecture on ancient superstitions, specifically about mirrors being seen as portals to other worlds, and the ritual of covering mirrors in a room where someone had died to prevent their soul from being trapped. I realized I wasn't dealing with a normal ghost. I was dealing with a doorway, and I had inadvertently peeked through it. I started doing research, not on ghosts, but on old superstitions, folklore, and strange objects. I found stories of mirrors being used in seances, mirrors being cursed, mirrors that were thought to hold the reflections of past owners. It was all so esoteric and surreal, but it felt more real to me than anything I'd ever experienced. The solution came to me in a strange, half-waking dream. I saw a woman, her face a blur, telling me to sever the connection. When I woke up, I knew what I had to do. The next day, I went to a local antique shop and bought a small, antique, circular mirror, not for looking into, but for what it represented. I took it home, and with a lump in my throat, I uncovered my bathroom mirror. The crack was still there, but the air felt normal. I took a deep breath, and with a marker, I drew a circle around the crack, just like I had seen in my dream. I then took the small antique mirror and held it up, reflecting the larger mirror. I repeated a phrase I had found in one of my books, a simple, ancient incantation for closing a portal. The words were simple, almost like a prayer. The reflection is broken, the connection is severed. What is on the other side stays on the other side. As I said the words, I felt a faint hum in the air. The small mirror felt warm in my hand, and the light reflected back seemed to ripple. I closed my eyes and whispered the final words, "Go back." When I opened my eyes, The crack in the large mirror was gone. The mirror was whole, but it was foggy, like a film had been spread over it. I never used that mirror again. I just left the blanket over it, a silent sentinel against a horror I couldn't understand. I still have the small, antique mirror tucked away in a drawer. It's a reminder of a night that changed me forever, a night when I learned that some doors are better left unopened, and some reflections are better left unseen. It's just past midnight, and the man is alone in a rundown public bathroom. The stale air carries the faint scent of disinfectant mixed with something more metallic, something wrong. As he sits in a stall, ready to leave, a cold, clammy hand suddenly slides slowly under the divider, wrapping around his wrist like icy chains. Panic spikes through his body as he tries to yank free, but the grip tightens, unyielding. He peers over the divider. The adjacent stall is empty, but the hand remains, as if belonging to a ghost. It disappears, only to reappear moments later with desperate force, pulling him toward the empty space. The bathroom seems to shift and close in, the fluorescent lights flickering violently, as if the entire room is alive and intent on trapping him forever. I still get chills just thinking about it. It happened a few years ago, back when I was a college kid just scraping by. I was in my final semester, completely drowning in student loans and working a terrible overnight stocking job at a grocery store to make ends meet. I lived in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment that smelled perpetually of old coffee and instant ramen, and my life basically revolved around three things: my textbooks, my awful boss, and the desperate hope that one day I'd have a real job and not have to count every single penny. This was probably the most stressed and sleep-deprived I'd ever been, and honestly, the sheer exhaustion made everything feel a little bit blurry. My routine was a grind. Classes all morning, a quick nap if I was lucky, then straight to work from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. This particular night, a Friday, was especially brutal. I had a huge paper due on Monday, and my boss, a guy with a face like a bulldog and a personality to match, had scheduled me for an extra long shift. My mind was a complete mess of due dates and inventory numbers. The store was in a pretty sketchy part of town, right on the edge of the industrial district. The whole area had this heavy, metallic smell, like a mix of rust and old machinery. The building itself was ancient and probably hadn't been updated since the 80s. The fluorescent lights hummed with a sickly, yellow glow that made everything look sterile and a little bit sad. I was on my lunch break, which was really just an excuse to hide in the back for 15 minutes and stare at my phone. The only available bathroom was the one for customers, located in a dimly lit corner of the store. It was always cold in there, and it smelled of a weird mix of cheap floral air freshener and something else, something I could never quite place. That night, the feeling was different. As I pushed open the heavy door, a wave of cold air hit me, colder than usual. The hum of the lights seemed to get louder, and the silence inside felt heavy, almost suffocating. The air was thick with a stillness that made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. I felt a prickle of unease, a familiar feeling in that place, but this time it was stronger, like a warning bell ringing somewhere deep inside my gut. I went into the stall on the far end, not that it mattered, since I was the only one in there. The walls were a pale, institutional green, covered in so much graffiti that it was hard to tell what the original color was. I swear one of them was a drawing of a cyclops with a third eye on its tongue. It was bizarre. I sat down, my mind still racing with thoughts of my essay and the endless pallets of canned goods I'd have to move. I wasn't in there long, maybe a minute. I was just about to get up when I felt it. A pressure under the partition. I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the old building settling, but the feeling became more distinct. It wasn't a draft. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like someone was feeling along the floor with their hand. I froze, my body going rigid. I'm not proud to admit it, but my first thought was, oh God, don't let it be a mouse. I waited, not daring to move, my heart hammering against my ribs so loud I was sure it could be heard through the thin metal walls. And then, the hand. I saw it first, a pale, almost grayish thing sliding under the divider. It wasn't a normal hand. The fingers were long, unnaturally so, and the skin had this weird, slick look to it, like it was covered in a thin film of something. It was completely still for a second, just resting on the grubby tile floor, and then it moved. Slowly, so slowly, it crawled forward. My breath hitched in my throat. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as it wrapped around my ankle. The grip wasn't tight at first, but it was there, a cold, clammy pressure that felt like it was seeping into my very bones. It was a chilling, unnatural cold, not like an ice cube, but like something that had been buried deep in the earth for a long, long time. The hand felt wrong. It was too cold, too still, and the pressure it was applying to my ankle was firm, almost possessive. Panic started to bubble up in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was a joke, a prank by some twisted coworker, but the silence in the bathroom was absolute. No muffled laughter, no footsteps, just me and the cold hand on my ankle that I instinctively tried to yank my ankle away, but the grip on me was far stronger than any human could possibly muster. It was like I was caught in a steel trap, unyielding and ice cold. A scream got caught in my throat, a dry, pathetic sound that never fully escaped my lips. I pulled again, my entire body tensing, but it only tightened its hold. I could feel each long, skeletal finger pressing into my skin, the pressure so intense I thought my bone might snap. The hand itself was still, not moving or shaking, just holding on with an impossible, static force. That's when I finally got the courage to lean over and look into the next stall. I had to know what was on the other side. My mind was screaming for a human explanation, for a prank, for a coworker hiding and laughing. I needed to see a face that I stood on the toilet seat, gripping the sides of the stall, and slowly, carefully, peered over the top of the divider. My heart was a frantic drum solo against my chest. What I saw made my blood run colder than that hand. The stall was empty. Completely, utterly empty. The door was slightly ajar, just as I'd seen it before, but there was no one in there. No feet on the floor. No body slumped against the wall. Nothing. Just the dingy, green-painted walls and a stainless steel toilet. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The hand wasn't attached to anyone. It was just there. A disembodied hand, coming from an empty space. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, and the knowledge of it made the grip on my ankle feel 1,000 times more real and menacing. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I was frozen in place, staring at an empty stall, with something invisible holding me hostage. With the empty stall burning a hole in my mind, the hand on my ankle suddenly vanished. Just like that, it was gone. The cold lingered for a moment, a phantom feeling on my skin, and I scrambled off the toilet seat, my heart still a frantic drum. I was about to bolt out of there, to forget my job and everything else and just run, when it came back. Not the same way as before. This time, it reappeared with a horrible, wet slapping sound under the divider, and the grip on my ankle was instant and brutally strong. It wasn't a gentle hold anymore. It was a violent tug. The force was so great that I stumbled, my feet sliding on the slick floor tiles. I felt a searing pain shoot up my leg as the hand pulled, trying to drag me down, to pull me under the partition into that empty, silent space. I gripped the side of the stall, my knuckles turning white, my entire body screaming in protest. The hand was pulling with a relentless, desperate power, and I could feel myself losing the fight, my mind completely short-circuited. I wasn't thinking about my job or my grades anymore. All I could feel was the terrifying pull and the cold, lifeless grip around my ankle. The bathroom itself seemed to react to the struggle. The flickering fluorescent lights, which had been a low, sickly glow, began to strobe violently, casting jumpy, frantic shadows all around me. The hum of the lights became a high-pitched whine that grated on my nerves. The air grew heavy, like it was being compressed, and the already stale smell of disinfectant was suddenly overpowered by that metallic, wrong scent I'd noticed earlier. But now it was stronger, like old blood and rust. The entire room seemed to be closing in, the walls and ceiling pressing down on me. It felt like the bathroom was alive, a hungry, breathing thing that was trying to swallow me whole, and the hand was its awful, unblinking eye, its way of pulling me into its dark gullet. I felt myself losing ground, my legs giving way under the immense, unseen pressure, inching closer and closer to that terrifying empty stall. I could feel my body being dragged, my worn-out sneakers squeaking on the tiles as I was pulled. I dug my heels in, gritting my teeth, trying to find some purchase, some way to stop the relentless slide. The hand on my ankle was a vice. and it was so cold that the skin there felt numb, like it was made of ice. My other foot was planted as best as it could be, pushing back against the force, but it was no use. I was losing the fight against an enemy I couldn't see. My mind was screaming for a logical explanation, but all I could come up with was the image of that empty stall, a void that was trying to claim me. I could feel myself getting closer and closer, my head nearly touching the ground as I was pulled sideways. The hand gave a final, powerful jerk, and I felt my grip on the stall door give way. My body went limp with fear, my hope draining away. I was ready to be pulled into a dark and unknown place. Just as my head was about to hit the floor, a loud, metallic clang echoed through the bathroom. The sound was so sharp and sudden that it cut through the high-pitched whine of the lights. The hand's grip on my ankle loosened, and I scrambled backward, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm. I looked up, dazed and terrified, to see the bathroom door swinging open. My boss, the bulldog-faced guy, stood there, his eyes squinted in the dim light. "Hey, you sleeping in here?" he grumbled, his voice cutting through the thick, terrifying atmosphere. "Your break was over 5 minutes ago." The mundane, human sound of his voice was like a bucket of cold water. It shattered the spell. The fluorescent lights returned to their steady, sickly hum. The air lost its suffocating weight, and the cold, clammy feeling on my ankle was completely gone, replaced by the warmth of my own pulse. The hand was gone. I just stared at my boss, speechless, my heart still racing a million miles an hour, my body shaking with leftover terror. He just scowled, oblivious to the horror I had just faced. "Get out here," he said, turning and walking away. "We've got pallets of tomato cans to move." Even as I followed him out, my legs feeling wobbly and unsteady, I couldn't shake the terror. I kept looking back at the bathroom door, half expecting to see that pale hand slide out from under it. My boss, completely oblivious, just kept grumbling about the schedule and how some of us lacked hustle. I tried to focus on his words, on the bright, normal lights of the main store, on the familiar sight of shelves stocked with cereal boxes and bags of chips. But my mind was replaying the empty stall, the unnatural cold of the hand, and the gut-wrenching feeling of being dragged by something that shouldn't exist. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. How would I even begin to explain it? Hey, a disembodied hand tried to pull me into a parallel dimension from a public bathroom stall. They'd think I was crazy, or just trying to get out of work. So I just kept my mouth shut, feeling like a ghost myself as I went through the motions of the rest of my shift. For the next few weeks, I avoided that bathroom like the plague. I'd hold it for as long as I could, or use the one at a gas station down the street. The thought of that cold, clammy grip was enough to make my stomach clench. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, a perpetual state of unease settling over me. The memory of it was so vivid, so real, that I couldn't just write it off as a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. The cold, the force, the feeling of the room closing in, it was all too tangible. I started a new routine, one where I would rush home as soon as my shift ended, not stopping for anything. It wasn't until about a month later, when I was completely out of options and my bladder was about to burst, that I had to brave the dreaded bathroom again. I stood outside the door for a full 5 minutes, trying to talk myself into it, but the need was too great. With a shaking hand, I pushed the door open. The air was normal. The lights were a steady hum. Nothing was different. I used the very first stall by the door, refusing to go anywhere near the one at the end. Nothing happened. It felt like a normal bathroom. The hand was gone. It never came back. I have no idea why it picked me or why it stopped. All I know is that sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still feel the echo of that cold grip on my ankle.